Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, then I know you'll enjoy the Girl Dad Discussion podcast. I'm your host, Earnest James, and I believe the relationship between a daughter and her father is one of the most important relationships a young lady can have. And therefore, my mission is to promote the daddy-daughter relationship by sharing the voices of girl dads to the world. So check out our podcast on every platform where podcasts can be listened to. And if you want to watch the podcast, check us out on our YouTube channel. Again, that's the Girl Dad Discussions podcast with your host, Earnest James. Are you looking for inspiration on a daily basis? Well, check out Deal to Heal Tees. With our inspirational tees, you're sure to find something that will inspire you. Just go to dealtohealtees.myshopify.com. That's Deal to Heal Tees. Get some inspiration in your situation. Wear inspirational tee and be inspired all day. That's Deal to Heal Tees at dealtohealtees.myshopify.com. Hey guys, this is Earnest James, host of the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, and I got a question to ask you. Could you buy me a cheeseburger? Better yet, could you buy me a value meal? Yes? Well, guess what? I don't need a value meal. However, for the cost of a value meal, you can support this podcast to keep us on the air. Just go to Patreon/Deal to Heal podcast and choose any one of the 3 tiers that's available. And if you just want to make a one-time donation, go to Cash App and make a donation to $eJames, the number 418. Make a one-time donation to the Cash App, or again, go to Patreon to support this podcast and keep us on the air. Thanks in advance. Be blessed. Welcome to Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. On this podcast, my guest and I will discuss topics and ways to help us to heal in every area of our lives. I believe that everyone can live a life that is happy, healthy, and whole. So I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I'm your host, Earnest James, and I believe that everyone can and should live a life that is whole, healed, and healthy. And therefore, I'm on a mission to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill, to deal with your problems, to heal from the pain, and to fulfill your purpose. Thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. If you haven't already, make sure that you listen, like, subscribe, and share to our podcast on our YouTube channel. Definitely on all the places that you can hear us. We are on Audible. We're on, of course, YouTube. We're on Spotify, and different podcast platforms. Make sure you guys are checking us out. Again, thank you guys for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Also, make sure that you guys are checking out our websites. Our business website for our full business website is the dealhealfulfill.org. Dealhealfulfill.org. Make sure you're checking us out there. You find out everything that we have going on, including being able to have me come out as a speaker or a workshop to do workshops with you guys. Also, we have virtual workshops that's also going on. You'll be able to find information about that, and also about our other products that we have going on, including if you go to ebooks by ejames.com, you'll see the ebooks that I have available. Again, we are a self-sustained podcast. So the way that we stay on the air is by you guys supporting us. So definitely, I encourage you guys to go check out the ebooks that we have, and also the Deal to Heal tees on Shopify, which is our inspirational tees. So put some inspiration in your situation, wear an inspirational tee, and be inspired all day. Again, thank you guys once again for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. So Today, just like any other day, we are blessed with a guest right now, Mr. Terrence. How you doing?
How you doing, man? Appreciate you for having me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
No problem, no problem. First of all, let me say thank you for being here. Thank you for being on. Because you could have been anywhere doing anything else, but you took our time to be here with me and my listeners, and we definitely appreciate it. So let's jump right into it. Do me a favor, introduce yourself to my audience and let them know who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so Terence Tillman, aka T-Till, certified life coach, speaker, workshop facilitator, podcast host, do a little bit of everything. I have a merch line as well, so kind of like you, whereas all geared towards positivity and affirmations and things like that. So I do a little bit of everything, but most importantly, it's all about impact. So just want to make an impact wherever I can.
That's it. That's it. And first of all, I don't remember exactly how we met. I don't remember exactly how we met, but I had the pleasure of being on your podcast. And definitely by the time this is coming out, that episode probably will be out. So y'all probably be
Yeah.
able to catch me on Conversations of the Heart, right?
Yes, sir. Conversation of the Heart with T-Tail. And yeah, yours will be coming out probably in less than a month. So yeah, stay tuned.
All right, all right. So definitely by the time this come out, it should be way well out, by the
Absolutely.
time because we're recording. So man, so first of all, we even when we got on before we even started your podcast, we got on just to chop it up and have a little conversation and kind of get to know each other before we probably was on about an hour, you know,
Yeah.
before we
Yeah.
even scheduled a podcast. So it was like, all right, we got to actually record this
Gotta
thing, right?
record. Yeah. Yep.
So we definitely had some good conversation. I wanted to kind of bring some of those conversations here, to this platform, because I think that as I was definitely trying to add some value to your listeners, I definitely understand and got to know that you would definitely add some value to the listeners of the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast listeners. And so do me a favor, let's just go back. Of course, you mentioned you are uh, podcast host, also a coach, a life coach and things like that. So, but before you were who you are,
Mhm.
it was a journey. You know what I'm saying? So let's go back a little bit and tell us a little bit of who you were before, and what was or at least one of the incidents that helped you or was the turning point in your life to say, you know what, I'm going to start coaching and actually helping others become positive and bringing that positive message that you have now.
Yeah, so it's always been in me, and I think I got it from my mom. I've growing up as a kid, I watched her pour into a lot of people. Whether it be her church friends, her work friends, people that she didn't even know, strangers that she would see in the mall. Like I would go with her to the mall, and she would strike up a conversation with strangers and like start pouring into them. And to see their reaction. So I've been around that for a long time, and growing up in high school, I was the kid that people went to talk to. Terrence, can we talk? Yeah, and I'm like, okay, let's talk. It felt like, at the young age of 14, 15, 16, I'd be counseling people for hours on the phone too, and my mother wasn't too happy about the phone bill and tying up her line back in the day. But that's what I was doing, at a very young age. And that transitioned into, just a a sales career. Um, and then kind of just working my way in the corporate world and various different companies. And but really kind of feeling a little unfulfilled, right? But I was making money, so
Right, right,
I was rolling with it, and sales can be grueling in any company that you go to, but it's hard to take yourself away from the money.
right,
And I remember but I always had this passion for helping people. So no matter what I did in a 9 to 5, I was always the one that people called for advice and things like that. But that's just who I was. But then in 2013, my mom had a aneurysm. And, going through that process and taking short-term disability so I can be with, my mom and my dad, because also at the time my dad was doing chemo at the same time that my mom was, in the hospital with the brain aneurysm. So it's just like, just needed some time. So after all of that, I come back to work, and maybe about a week and a half later, I get laid off.
Mm.
I'm like, wow, right? I've put in, some time with this company, and I'm like, wow, like, okay, my parents got sick, and now right when I don't need to get laid off, I get laid off.
Right.
At this point, you want to be, somebody that can support your parents, financially, emotionally, just be there. So I was like, man, this is not ideal, and at this point I'm upset, of course, just going through the motions, and um started to really think about what I really wanted to do in life. At this point, I had some time. I'm in the hospital 24/7 at this point with my parents. And I'm home, right? Looking for
Right.
work. I got a lot of time. And at that point, I'm like listening to a bunch of motivational speakers. Like, I'm trying to keep myself up because I just lost my job, and it really sucks to see my parents in their condition. And so, I started to go to some of these seminars and some of these motivational talks and in live, and I would drag some of my friends with me. There's one particular friend I would drag with often, and she's like one of my best friends. And one day I said, "Listen, come, just come with me." And she's like, "I've been to so many of these motivational talks with you, and listening to other people." And she said, "Don't invite me to another one until your name is on the bill."
Mm.
I said, "What you mean?" Like, I said, "What are you talking about?" Like, my name on the bill. Like, I'm not like, I'm looking for inspiration. She goes, "You've been inspiring people for years. You should be up there. You should be doing this stuff." And I'm
Mm.
like, "Ain't no way." I said, "No, no, I'm good." Right. But going home, thinking, and I said, "Wait a minute. Maybe I could do this. I don't know how I would do it, but I love doing this." Right? But it was more so with people I know, or people who would just say, "Hey, well, call my friend Terrence. He could help you out." So that's kind of how I got my start. Next thing I know, the first thing I had to do is get over certain things. I
Mhm.
wasn't confident. I was confident in my abilities to help and change people's lives, right? But when it came to strangers, I wasn't confident simply because I had a speech impediment. So I said, I can't go up there talking. You crazy? I'm gonna get online and start talking. I'm gonna go to whose auditorium am I going in talking?
Right.
I had a stutter. I had a bad stutter since I was 3 years old. That's just always been what it was, you know. But I made the choice. Then I said, you know what? I went to speech therapy when I was a kid, and didn't work at
Mhm.
all. Um, so me speaking in public terrified me to no end. It terrifies most people.
Yeah.
But when you have a stutter and you've been made fun of, you've been ridiculed. I mean, back in the day, it's not how it was. Now, back in the day, you get
Right.
stepped on in a minute. I'm from New York City. It's on and popping. Like,
Right.
so through elementary school, high school, college, like, it's just, you couldn't get me to go up there. School project, look, I'll do the project from A to Z, please. But I'm not presenting nothing. Like, that's just how it was, so I knew there was a big barrier in front of me that I had to try to get over. So first step for me was trying to get over my speech impediment. I didn't know how. I didn't know where to start. Start researching things online, and how could I how could it help me? And then I really started to pay attention to myself. When do I start? When do I stutter the most? And what parts? Right. And then, going through these things, I started to find out that a lot of it, for me, it was very emotional based. If I'm too excited, angry, positive or negative, I really stuttered a lot. Anxiety. If I
Mm.
knew I was going to speak, My heart is going 1,000 beats per minute. I got hot sweat going down the back of my neck. And I knew as soon as somebody called on me to talk, I was going to mess it up. Anxiety. And I did. I
Yeah.
messed it up worse. So it was now was all right. So how can I change this? The way I speak, how fast I speak. Because whenever I'm angry or I'm happy, I speak fast, stutter a lot. So I literally had to retrain how I spoke every day. Probably about 2.5 years. I've just retrained everything. And then once I got it of what I need to do or how I need to speak, and once it became a little bit more natural to me, then I said, okay, I'm a little bit more comfortable with this part of myself now. It seems like I don't stutter as much. It seems like I got something here. Let me go and start making these videos.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Then
you
you want to
started
add.
doing YouTube videos, like
No, I
motivational
first
videos?
started on IG back when it was like 15-second clips. I
Okay.
think it was, you just had to do, you got 15 seconds to make a video and make it count.
Right.
And so now imagine I have a new way of talking and I have to get my message out in like 15 seconds. But when I speak fast,
You gonna
I
start?
stutter. I didn't calculate this in my head as I was doing this process. And so frustration because now I'm doing like 1,000 takes for a 1 15-second clip
Right.
for 2 hours just to get one message out. And it was so frustrating. Very frustrating. But I started to do it. I messed up a lot. I stuttered. Um, but I put it out anyway, and the interesting thing is people online could be very judgy. And the one thing I used to do when I first started, and I never took it down. I never took my first videos down. I wore sunglasses. People thought I was doing it to be cool. Truth is, I was doing it to hide myself
Hmm.
because I was stuttering and I was embarrassed and I knew I would mess up. But that made me comfortable a little bit because I felt people couldn't really see me, even though they were looking at me.
Yeah.
And I remember people in the comments, "Oh, he thinks he's so cool. Look at what he's wearing sunglasses." And I'm like, "Oh man, if you only knew it was because I'm trying to hide, bruh. I just didn't want to be seen because I was embarrassed. Real talk." And
Yeah.
I kept those videos up on YouTube. People could probably still find them. They're on Instagram. You could probably still find them because that's where I started.
Right.
And and honestly, at some point, people started to pay attention to more of the message than the stutter.
Yeah.
And once I started to realize that, then I started to gain a little bit more confidence. And thankfully, IG switched it from 15 to 30 seconds. Thank
Right.
you, IG. That 15 seconds was killing me. And so, you know, so then once I started to gain a little bit more confidence. And then, as far as work went, I said, you know what? Let me get out of sales. So I went into not the nonprofit sector and I became a job developer and a job readiness trainer. And pretty much I took that job also because it forced me at that point to be in a room teaching a class 5 days a week, training people on how to get jobs, interviewing techniques, um, self motivation, motivating, just everything working in that nonprofit sector. So I said, I'm gonna take this job because it's gonna challenge me to now be in front of a classroom 5 days a week. If I want to do this other work outside of my corporate job here, then if I want to talk in auditoriums, theaters, wherever, I got to get in front of people
Right.
because it's one thing to do this and you're on a phone or you set it there and you're talking to people. There's nobody really watching. You're pre-recorded. Yeah, but
Hmm.
what's going to happen when I'm in front of people with this speech impediment, right? And with this new way of talking? how is my nerves going to react? How's my anxiety? How am I going to react to this? And so I purposely took that job because I wanted the challenge. And so it was an amazing job. And it really helped me propel myself. Now, when I said, "Hey, listen, I want to talk at your nonprofit. I want to talk in your school." But once people saw me online, they start taking me a little bit more seriously and said, "Oh, you're taking this really seriously. You want to talk? Okay, cool. So we have this nonprofit. Come talk. Working with different sororities and fraternities. Hey, you want to talk? Come on, right? Different universities in New York. Oh, come on over."
Right.
And I'm like, I'm getting now. I'm talking. And now it's like I would have never in my life. If you would have asked me, would you ever in your life be speaking to people publicly? I would have told you. I would have bet every last dollar cent I had that would be the last thing I would do in my life. The last thing, you know. But here I am. Started that, and then it went further.
Right.
Then I said, I want to coach. And then
Right.
that's when that happened. So that's kind of a little bit about journey. I didn't mean to be so long with it, but
Right.
yeah.
Well, I expected that already, you know. But I want to go back. First, one thing I want to mention, you mentioned about your friend kind of telling you, to get out there more or less, and I always like to hear that because it was it's funny sometimes how people can see things that you can't see in yourself,
Hmm.
and one of the things that I did was became an assistant pastor, right? I was assistant pastor, and I was a associate minister at a church for some years, and then one of the other associate ministers felt the call to start a church and asked me to go with him. Um, but even before that, it was several different pastors, or preachers, should I say, had came to me, and even some pastors had came to me and asked me to come join them, with their ministries and things. And you know, at the church that we were at, like I said, I was a social minister. Maybe at its highest, probably maybe been like 10, 15 of us,
Hmm.
ministers, and so out of the
Yeah.
15, when everybody would speak and have their chance to preach on different Sundays and things like that, to me, just watching the presentation of, those who my peers, should I say, I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm not them. What I'm saying? I don't present the
Right.
way that they present, but yet, you know, some of them and either others was coming to me and asking me to join them. And so I'm like, man, it must be something that I don't see, And I know even in one of the conversations that I had with a friend of mine who was a preacher and became a pastor, he kind of reaffirmed that because I told him, I said, man, I've been asked, and I don't really, I don't think I'm, all that or whatever. And then he was like, no, you can't see what other people see in you, And so, like your
Mm.
friend, seeing that in you and putting that in your ear to go ahead and step out there. And even with me with the podcast, I was a guest on someone else's podcast, and it was them that said, hey, I think you should have your own podcast. That put that buzz in
Amazing.
my ear. Shout out to Josh Ashford, and
Hmm.
I actually had him on when I started the podcast. I had him come on
Hmm.
as one of my first guests. So definitely those conversations with your people who, like I said, see something in you that you don't see in yourself, and can speak into you to step out there on that faith, and to start what it is that could turn out to be your calling. You know
Very
what I
true.
mean?
No, it's
So
very true. I don't think I'd be. I don't think I'd have a podcast or coaching. Like it all stemmed from that word. It all stemmed from that birthed everything that has happened since. So shout out to Tanya on the scene for that. Appreciate that.
definitely, definitely. So I want to go back to one of the things that you said, because one of the things that um we talked about we talked about before on your podcast, and
Mhm.
coming into it, we're dealing with men and you deal with therapy and with mental health.
Mhm,
Definitely want to talk a little bit about that with the mental health part of it, and also talk a little bit about grief. Because
mhm.
um, we've had the conversation.
Yeah.
On a podcast, I've definitely mentioned about me losing my mom. And you losing your father. And
Mhm.
like I shared with you at the time that we were recording this, we just buried one of my aunts,
Yeah.
who passed away. And so, even with all of that, first of all, let's just talk a little bit about mental health in men. Because
Mhm.
it's not something that we hear about a lot. It's not something that we share too much. So how important is it, from your point of view, for us just as men, first of all, and then as a community at whole, but definitely as men to be able to come to grips with our mental health.
It's super important. You know, we have a lot of pressure, you know, um, that's on our shoulders. And then also we have a lot of ego as well, right? And but for mental health, I mean, when you look at the suicide rates, they double with women, right? Um, and so for us, really understanding what mental health is, understanding our triggers, and understanding what grief um, is crucial to our mental health,
Yeah.
and not being ashamed of getting therapy. I grew up a church kid, and sometimes back in the day was that was shunned upon, especially in the church, and then in the community too. On top of that, it's why are you going to see a therapist? You quote unquote crazy, like what's wrong with you? Things like that. But now that we're older, now that we have understanding, like it's super important to understand therapy is for everybody. It's not for a particular gender. It's not for it has to be any other race. It's genderless. It's doesn't matter your race. We need therapy, man. We've been dealing with things since we were born. A lot of especially in our own community, a lot of us, were born in the red, especially when it comes to mental health. Born into poverty, born, single parent households, trauma, like born into just different situations. And we pride ourselves in being overcomers and we fight. And that's amazing. But now, it's time, like you said, it's time to heal, right? You know, it, Gone are the days that we could afford to gloss over the
Mhm.
trauma. You can't gloss over the trauma anymore. Those days have to be over because you end up passing it down to your kids, and then they end up passing it down to their kids. Like we don't talk about things. What happens in this house stays in this house, boy.
Right, right.
What? What? Like it
Yeah,
does it, but that never is the truth because the trauma gets passed down and it spreads to the different households, right?
right.
So you know, we've got to, especially as men, we've got to create different safe spaces just like this, right? Deal the Hill podcast, right? We got to have safe spaces like this that we can come on and be able to express and talk and be open about real life. Not what's on social media, but what's in real life. Because
Right.
everybody's balling on social media. Everybody has good credit on social media. Everybody's been married for 45 years on social media. Everything is so glamorous, but we just see the highlights. We don't really see the real. We don't.
Yeah,
So like it's really crucial for us. It's crucial for our community, and you know, um, really understanding grief too. That grief, right? Grief is something
yeah,
different.
yeah. But so before we get on grief, real quick, I wanted to go back to something that you just mentioned about actually two things. First of all, men going to therapy, and then
Mhm.
also um, passing them traumas on to our kids, right? And so just recently, I started releasing, the episodes from my other podcast, which is the
Mhm.
Girl Dad Discussions podcast. And my first guest was a gentleman named Theran Peterson,
Mhm.
and his child he was having his first child, which was a girl, so brand new father, brand new girl dad. And one of the things that he said was, since the birth of his daughter, he's been going to therapy because he didn't want to pass any traumas down to her. So him
Beautiful.
and his wife had started going to therapy to deal with their own issues or whatever, so they wouldn't pass it down to their
Mhm.
daughter. And so I was told him, definitely proud of him, especially as
Yeah.
a new dad, to even think of that. You know what I mean? To be like, what,
Big.
let me get this straight, so we don't pass this down to his daughter. You know,
Mm.
so I was wanted to touch on that. Definitely, guys, check out the Girl Dad Discussions podcast. So, but then
Mhm.
even outside of that, we also, like I mentioned, we're talking about grief, and I know I've talked about losing my mom on the podcast and going
Yeah.
into depression with that, and even to the point of having suicidal ideations and things
Yeah.
like that, and also with you losing your father, how what kind of effect did that have on you? I'm not sure what age you were, at that
Yeah.
time, but what
Mhm.
kind of effect did that have on you? And how did you even come to deal with some of the grief that you were going through at that time?
And it was 2016, so we're looking at about 7 years ago, right? So I was about 31, if I'm not mistaken, and I didn't really acknowledge the grief. I think I had a moment at the funeral, and
Mhm.
then after that, I went into protection mode for my mother. From me, I told this to myself. I said, they were married at the time 43 years. So I said, look, I know how things go, especially with older people. People getting
Mhm.
older. When one goes, God forbid, another one goes shortly after. So I put it on my shoulders. I said, if my mom dies, it's it's my fault. It's my responsibility to make sure that she's good emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Like, put it all on me. It is what it is. And I went into that mode, which, truth be told, I couldn't really help. Like, that it's such a burden in a sense of like putting that on you. Like, if somebody dies,
Mhm.
it's your fault.
Right.
But looking back on it, it's like, if it, God forbid, that did happen, it wouldn't have been my fault, right?
Right.
But at the time, that's the mode that I was in, because I didn't want to lose another parent.
Right.
And so I was doing everything I could, trying to fill my dad's shoes as best I possibly could, right? Being, just being there and whatever she needed. And sometimes I had to be, uh, tough, even on her with certain things, show compassion. I had to be her therapist at the time, because, Black folk don't believe in therapy a lot, especially the older folks don't believe in
Mhm.
therapy, right? So I would get her everything, her anger, her sadness. And sometimes, it would be like we'd bump heads a lot. At the time, we were always super close. And but at that time, it became a thing of, our mother-son dynamic became a little strained because of everything else that had to get done.
Mhm.
And so for like 3 years, that was the mode that I was in. Um, Protect mom, try to save her from herself. She's grieving
Right.
hard. I don't know what it's like to lose somebody that you've loved for 43 years. Well, you married 43, but you with them longer,
Right.
right? So she's going through a lot. And so I didn't really acknowledge my own grief. That was to the side. Then I think then my mom moved to she moved away. Well, she moved with my older brother, who, and they're in the ATL, and so, at that point, um you know I think that's when I started to begin to feel it, because it was just at that point, it was just me,
Right.
right? And then the pandemic happened. Got laid off from my job. Everybody almost got laid off in the pandemic,
Right. Right.
if you wasn't an essential worker. And at that point, when you have to sit in the stillness, then everything starts to come. And then I think that's when I said, oh, I have never grieved this part, of my life. Never did. And it was 20, so we're talking 4 years later when everything starts to hit, when I'm still. I don't have to,
Mhm.
I have nobody to almost really look after like that, take care of like that. Um, it's sitting there just me, really like that, and I'm dealing with a lot. I'm in the pandemic now. We got the At that point we got George Floyd things going on. We got the pandemic
Mhm.
things going on. We can't go outside, and I'm sitting there with my thoughts. And then at that point, I started to research a lot about grief. I started reading books. And One of the most amazing books by Megan Devine is, it says it's okay that you're not okay, and that book changed my whole life on grief and my whole perspective on it, and how grief isn't just for death, and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, like that's so profound, because sitting here angry about the George Floyd stuff, I'm incensed about the George Floyd stuff. I'm outside in the protest. There's COVID going on. I got masks on. I got mask on. I'm protesting. I'm angry. Come home, think about my dad. I don't have my dad. My mom has moved. My mom has moved away. It's me, right? And that was a time, but it taught me a lot because I had to sit with it. I couldn't overwork it. I couldn't outwork grief. I
Mhm.
couldn't, because I wasn't working. You
Right.
can't outdrink grief. You can't sex it away. You can't. It's not gonna happen, and it's not gonna work. And so I had to really deal with it. Um, and so yeah, then just going to doing my own individual therapy
Right.
helped a lot too. That helped a whole lot. You know, um, but it's a process, and it's different for everyone, and it looks different for the different people that you're grieving. It looks very different too.
Yeah.
So it's not the same.
Yeah, and like I said, just recently, I just buried one of my aunts, and I was having a
Condolences.
conversation with someone else the other day, who was saying, you know, when you lose certain people, it changes you,
Hmm.
and so I remember losing my grandmother, and that
Hmm.
definitely was a big change, in my
Hmm.
life. And but when I lost my mom, it changed everything, even my sense of compassion, somewhat towards people. It's just like that loss of a parent it's a different monster. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
God forbid, I haven't had the experience of the loss of a child, you know. But definitely that loss of a parent kind of changes you, you know what I mean, in a way that, losing some other people, or like you said, some other things, because grief, and loss just doesn't, pertain to death.
Right.
It pertains to anything that is taken away, or that you loses through some
Yeah.
instance. And but it just changes you, in a different way than I think some other things do, you know. Um, but even with that, man, and I know you mentioned about, us, especially as men, doing a therapy, and I definitely uh advise anybody and everybody, to do some therapy. And then especially if you're dealing with grief, I definitely would ask that you check out some bereavement therapy, some bereavement groups, because that's what I did when I went through the loss of my mom, and dealing with that. Actually, my mother and my mother-in-law at the time, who had passed away before my mom did, who I was very close to. And so those two deaths, back to back, was hard on me, and it was
Yeah.
that bereavement therapy that really helped me out. And so much so that I started, became a volunteer, and started doing it myself, to bring it
Hmm.
to the community, even at the church. So I definitely would encourage anyone, that's dealing with any type of grief and definitely loss of a loved one to not only get some therapy, but definitely get some bereavement. But one of the things I like that we're having this conversation because we talked about creating these safe spaces for men to be vulnerable, for us to
Mhm.
be able to communicate with each other. And I think that we need it, and it takes those of us who have the courage or the know-how to create and promote these spaces for us to be able to have these conversations, because if we don't, then we won't, right? And I always
Right.
had to, when I'm talking to guys, I'm like, I'm very open about the thing, or when I'm talking to anybody, but definitely my guys, I'm very open about the things that I've been through, as far as even my thing with grief and something like that, because I want us to be able to have the conversations, right? And I want us to have it. So when we talk about being vulnerable, how big is that for you, and how important do you think that is for us as men to be able to have that safe space?
Yeah, I mean, vulnerability is power. It's one of the most bravest things that I think that you can do. You know, uh, is to be vulnerable. Because no matter what you're going through, it's a point of admittance. Like, I am sad, I am angry, I'm frustrated, I want to cry, right? I want to cry. I want to feel, right? And so normally for men, the only acceptable emotion that we can do is anger and have is anger, because that's manly, right?
Yeah.
You like then but by then it could be too late.
Hmm.
People put themselves in bad situations when they're angry, end up in jail,
Yeah.
right? Road rage. I mean, different scenarios, right? You could hurt somebody, hurt yourself, right? But it's like we've got to get to a point that we could be open and honest with our fellow brothers, and just say, yo, bro, I'm going through it. Because as much partying as I've done it when I was in my teens and in my 20s, never really went to my boys and be like, yo, I'm going through. But we could be at the club and we could be partying and doing this, drinking, or even if it's watching football, basketball, whatever the case is, and we having barbershop talking, we arguing about who's better, LeBron or Mike. But then you go home, a shell of yourself, and you go home angry, sad, still having the same issues and problems. So I always tell my friends, I'd rather you come to me and talk to me, because I'd rather you do that than me looking at you in the box.
Right.
You- because it's important. If we can go out and have fun, then you should be able to come to me and talk about real life and real
Yeah.
life situations. Because the thing about vulnerability and grief go hand in hand. Because if I could be vulnerable with you about my grief, that helps me a lot. Because people think grief is just meant for a loss. But what I've learned at my age, and I got a little gray in my beard now. So at my age now, and I mean recently, somebody told me something, and I'm gonna connect it back to the vulnerability piece. Somebody told me something, and it blew my mind, and I had to sit and think about my life. Because he said, Terrence, you've been grieving for 25 years. And now mind you, this was a conversation I had with somebody who I decided to be vulnerable with and open with. And when he took my story and he said, look, he said, at 4 years old, your mom had breast cancer. You, that's when it started. When you were 4, your mom had breast cancer. She was 40. Into high school, your dad gets lung cancer. Has to have one lung removed, don't know if he's going to live or die. Hmm. Then your mom gets severe diabetes. Then your dad gets leukemia. He beat lung cancer just to get leukemia. So at this point in life, you're watching your dad go through rounds of chemo, rounds of radiation. You're watching your mom suffer. Your mom has an aneurysm. You watch her almost die again. Okay, cool. Then after that, 2 years later, your grandmother dies. A year after that, your father dies. And now just last year, my mom had two strokes and she's in the facility now with she's half of her body's paralyzed and she's immobile. Your whole life you've seen the two people that the most important people in your life
Hmm.
suffer endlessly. Hasn't really been a break. And you wonder why you're feeling the way you feel. In 2018, I was physically ill. 2018, 2 years after my dad passed, physically ill. Went to emergency room a bunch of times, had a bunch of doctors. Test. There was a test, I did it. Whatever test you could possibly think of, I went through. Not one diagnosis came back that I had something. Grief can manifest in various different ways. Stress,
Yeah.
grief, all these things can manifest in different ways in your body. You feel in different things, sickness. It's a real thing. And when I expressed to him my story and what I was going through, he said, "Bro, you've been grieving since you was 4. He said, "Bro, you 38?" He said, that's 90%, 95% of your life. You've
Right.
seen sickness. You've seen too much suffering up close and personal, right?" And it blew my mind because then I said, "Wow, you've been dealing with a broken heart for most of your life, and you didn't even really realize it
Hmm.
because you've just been going, moving, shaking.
Yep.
But as you get older, that moving and shaking is a little different
Yeah.
because things catch up with you when you get older. They catch up because you
Yeah.
can't keep going like that." And so, by me having a vulnerable conversation with this gentleman, the older gentleman too, is an incredible guy, but it made me think about my life and about my own mental health and about others doing the same thing I did, just going and only thinking grief is for loss. When currently, today, to this day, I'm grieving a woman that is still alive. She's living, but she's not really living.
Hmm.
And I'm currently grieving that. And
Yep.
it took me to have that conversation with this gentleman to realize it's not just for the losses. I've been grieving my parents since I was young, being sad that they're sick, being angry that they're sick, anger, that too. That's
Yeah.
the thing. Wondering why, right? And so I say that to say, we're living in a world where look at the economy. People are losing their jobs left and right. Not just women, men too. Head of households. What do you think that does to men? Because they're supposed to be the provider, the
Hmm.
protector, all of these things. They're grieving, and even if they don't know it, they're grieving this process. They could have been making over $100,000 a year, or whatever that number is. It's for their family. They have kids. You think they're not panicking right now? The job market is hard, but every day, what's being pumped out in social media? Well, if you can't take me here or there, then you broke. Or if you can't provide for this, then you broke. Or if you can't do this and that, but we don't talk about honesty. We don't talk about real life. What's happening to people out here in this world, and they grieving this. They're wondering, okay, well, how am I going to provide for my kids? I got 2 kids, 3 kids, whatever it is. I don't care if it's just one. I got a wife, whatever it is. They going through it, and you would know more than I. But from what I understand and from what I gather, once you have a wife, kids, the pressure gets elevated to an even more elite level where
Hmm.
you feel like, and when you lose certain things, especially when it comes to money, jobs, and things like that, when you lose that, the voices in your head get louder. Yo, are you worth it? Are you worthy? What you gonna do? How's your wife looking at you? How's your kids
Mhm.
looking at you? Even if they're not looking at you like this, because there's some women that they're so supportive. So we're not saying that, but it's you versus you, not even
Right.
them. They could be looking at you like you're still the man.
Mhm.
Your head, like I'm not the man. And they're looking at me crazy, even though they're not. And for a lot of men, they're going through this right now. Look at the economy. And so it's not, they're grieving, and it's not just about death. It's about everything that's happening to them while they're alive.
Right. Yeah. Even when I was that brings to mind something that I learned, a term definitely that I learned when I was going through that, my bereavement process.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I use all the time now, and it's your new normal,
Mm-hmm.
because things aren't normal as they was. So now it's a new normal, and then those new normals keep on happening. Like you said, your first new normal was when you were four. And then a couple years later it became new again. You know what I'm saying? And even now you mentioned more recently, it just became new again, and so that's even like you said, when we're talking about grief and how it applies to other things, you can grieve the life that you had because your life
Yes.
is not that way anymore. You know what I mean? So now it's, this new thing is new and it's different, and you might not like it. You know what I'm saying? And so now you're grieving, like, man, like you said, you have those questions. And then even when we talk about the grief wheel, with the emotions that you go through, definitely in no particular order, but you deal with all those emotions of asking why, and then being angry, and then trying to figure it out, and then saying, why me? You deal with all of that, and even to, like you said earlier, about if something had happened to your mom, it would have been your fault. You even go through that emotion, like, oh, am I to blame for this thing that has happened in my life? And
Mhm.
so definitely grief, we want to make sure that we are getting the help that we need. Definitely going to therapy if needed, definitely going to some kind of grief counseling. And if not, to do it, even doing it on your own, or reading books, or
Yeah.
doing things like that, because there's definitely a lot of information out there about it. And I think our community needs it. I think they need this conversation, to for us to be vulnerable, and talk about our losses, and the grief that we've dealt with, and things of that nature. And again, to make these safe spaces for other men to be able to feel comfortable enough to say that they're going through some things, and so I definitely thank you, man, Terrence, for being on. Before we get out of here, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your career coaching program
Hmm.
that you have. We'll switch it up a little bit. We don't want to end on a down note. We'll
Nah, nah, nah. Of
take it
course,
up
of
a little
course.
bit. So let's tell us a little bit about your coaching program, and how does it work, and how does
Hmm.
people get in contact with you?
Yeah, so how they can get in contact with me is go to my website, ttlinspires.com. The coaching program is right there, and it'll ask, say, hey, schedule a free session, and we'll talk, and that's the one thing about me is whether you book with me or whether you don't. The one thing is I'm pretty sure you'll come out with something positive out of that conversation, whether you book or not. That's the goal. But as far as the coaching part of it goes, we'll go through, just what you're looking for. I mean, there's resume services that I provide, interviewing techniques, and just even just job searching too. Sometimes people don't know, properly how to job search properly and things like that. So I kind of take them through all of those things, just depending on what you're looking for. And as far as life coaching, the one thing I do tell people about life coaching, it's not therapy. Life
Mhm.
coaching is geared towards getting you to where you want to be for the future, setting goals and creating curriculums to get you to where you want to get to the future. That's what life coaching is. But if I feel or I assess that, listen, hey, listen, we're talking a lot about past things, and we can go through past certain things in the past, but if we're still stuck on certain things, I might refer you to a therapist so that you can work with both of us hand in hand, so you can deal with your past, unpack in a healthy way, to get to your future, because sometimes you can't get to the future without getting through your past.
Hmm.
So if you can work on those things simultaneously, then we'll do that. So that's how kind of I do things with the life coaching and then the career coaching.
All right, all right. So again, Terrence, I want to thank you for being on, man. Thank you for taking out the time to have this conversation with me. Definitely, we probably need to do a part two and get into some other stuff,
Yeah.
But I appreciate you being on. I want to let you have the last word. So I want you to leave us with word of advice, inspiration, have you feel, and definitely drop your social media links and things like that, so people know where they can get in contact with you. So I'll give you a couple minutes to think about that. To my listeners, one of the things I forgot to mention at the beginning of the podcast, this has been so long, so I haven't even been recording in a little while, but one of the things that I forgot to mention is that you could win $100 from the podcast. And the way that you do that is by entering our super subscriber contest. And so, what do you need to do? You need to first subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and our podcast on Spotify. And after you've done those three things, then I need you to text the word WIN, WIN, to the number 866 326 0730 to qualify to win $100 from the podcast. The contest is random and it's ongoing, so it never stops. So at any time, once you're in, you can win, right? You can win $100 from the podcast again by joining our super subscriber contest, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and also our podcast on Spotify. And you can win $100. Also, make sure that you guys check out, again, like I said, our websites, and check out our partner podcast, which is the Girl Dad Discussions podcast, with conversations that I have with other girl dads. Of course, I am a girl dad myself, but I have conversations with other girl dads, and we're even started to have on some daughters now to talk about their experience with their fathers, because we definitely want to get into letting people know that we as fathers do exist, and we do have fathers that are in the lives of their daughters and that is pouring into their daughters. And also, as part of that, make sure you guys go to the ebooks by ejames.com. That's ebooks by ejames.com, and check out the four core, which is the four core values that every daughter should get from her father. That ebook is available at ebooks by ejames.com, as well as Males to Men, which is an ebook about male mentoring for young men as they journey into manhood. And also, there's one called Forgiving Me, the Four Steps to Self Forgiveness. I know we're talking about grief, and we're talking a little bit about mental health. So that one is definitely a big one to help us learn to forgive ourselves, first of all, for some of the things that we hold grudges against ourselves for in the past. So make sure you guys go check that out at ebooksbyejames.com. All right. So, Terrence, again, man, let me say thank you for being on. Thank you for having you and taking out the time to be here. Let you have the last word. So the floor is yours.
Well, first, I just want to thank you for extending the invite to me. I really appreciate it, and I encourage everyone to tune into these conversations here at the Deal to Heal podcast. Very important that we do have these conversations and have a platform, especially with people who look like us. So definitely
Mhm.
appreciate you for having me on. As far as my social medias, you can find me on Instagram as at T underscore till underscore inspires. Twitter at T Till Inspires. As far as Facebook, it's Conversation of the Heart Podcast. Merch line is T Till Inspires .com. You go to shop and you can get to see all of the positive affirmation merch that we do have there. And yeah, just the podcast Conversation of the Heart. Catch it on YouTube and anywhere where there's a podcast, iTunes and Apple and Google, all that good stuff is it's all there. Um, and the one thing that I'll say that I'll leave you with, it's you owe yourself everything. Like you owe you. And just for me, what that means is if you owe yourself some therapy, get some therapy. Right? You owe yourself the best in life. Right. And sometimes that starts with you making a decision to say, I don't like what's going on in this mirror. I don't like what's going on in my mind. I need something, right? And whether that means setting boundaries with others, with yourself, getting disciplined, just you owe you everything. Um, and we all make mistakes. So give yourself some grace in this whole process, because none of us have it all together. None of us has an answer to everything, So definitely give yourself some grace. Don't worry about what's on social media, what you see, because a lot of that's fake, like I said earlier. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Just run your race, live your life, and be the best you that you could possibly be, and make the best possible strides, man, because you owe it to yourself.
All right, all right. We can't end it no better than that. To my listeners, thank you guys for tuning in to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast, where our mission is to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problems, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. So until next time, be blessed. Hey guys, I know you're enjoying the podcast. However, don't forget to join our text line at 866 326 0730. That's 866 326 0730 in order to receive text messages with new events and things that is going on and new episodes as they release. All right, see you in a minute. Thanks for listening to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. Remember to listen, like, subscribe, and share. This episode has been brought to you by Deal to Heal Teas. Put some inspiration in your situation. Wear an inspirational tea and be inspired all day. Let's go to dealtohealteas.myshopify.com. Remember, our mission is to help you to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks for listening.